Great. I think we can get started now. Good evening and welcome everyone to our LCC Guidelines FY22 webinar. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that we have closed captioning services turned on for this webinar. So you can click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen where it says live transcript. You can also save it for your notes afterwards. So if you have any questions or comments during the webinar, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and a member of our community initiative team will respond and send them to our speakers. So to better introduce myself, my name is Timothea Pham, and I'm a program officer in the community initiative at the Mass Cultural Council. I work in the regions of the Greater Boston area, Greater Springfield area, and Nantucket. Today, I'm calling from East Somerville, Massachusetts, which was originally the land of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket people. I'm a Vietnamese American woman with straight, long brown hair, medium tan skin, and a white polo shirt. And my pronouns are she and hers. I'm here today with our community initiative team that you see right here, who I will introduce shortly. So we are joined by Lisa Simmons, who is our program manager for the entire community initiative team, Luis Cotto, who is the program manager for our cultural districts, and our program officers, Mina Kim, myself, Ricardo Guillaume, and Veronica Ramirez Martel. Great, so just a quick introduction. A bunch of you probably already know, but so our local cultural council program guidelines, you can follow these two links. We'll be able to send this presentation out afterwards, but we'll directly take you to the guidelines that we're going to go over right now. And during COVID, we did prepare a sheet on our massculturalcouncil.org website that would actually help local cultural councils navigate this challenging time. Next slide. So what are the purpose of these local cultural council guidelines? So the purpose of this document is to provide guidance to local and regional cultural councils on the policies and procedures they must use when awarding and distributing revolving account dollars to grant recipients. It also explains procedures LCCs must follow to ensure a thoughtful and transparent process for distributing public money. So the primary responsibilities of local cultural councils. I think, you know, the role of local cultural councils has changed a little bit over the years, but the primary responsibilities are awarding grants and organizing programs to address local cultural needs, soliciting community input and assessing local cultural needs, serving as a resource for the local cultural community, and advocating for arts and culture at local, regional, and state levels. So this is the timeline that we are going to have here. Basically from June to July 30th, local cultural councils were supposed to survey communities for input and what they liked from funded projects during upcoming cycle in order to inform local cultural council priorities. Basically, a lot of local cultural councils have been able to send out surveys, have been able to have virtual meetings, maybe some in-person meetings as well, just to get that community input. We can talk a little bit about that later. In August, councils are supposed to update their council priorities in the grants management system by August 31st. And also by August 31st, local cultural councils will decide on whether or not they want to do direct granting. So Lisa will be talking about that in a little bit. But basically, if you're already in the direct grant pilot program, you don't have to let us know. But if you are interested, August 31st is the deadline. So September 1st, this is when the FY22 grant cycle will open. So last year was a little bit of a tricky year, but we're reverting back to the September 1st deadline or opening date. So in October, grant applications due to local cultural councils by October 15th. And from November to December, local cultural councils will review the applications and hold voting meetings. Definitely check in with your town or city about open meeting law. You know, some people are doing virtual meetings and some people are able to do in-person meetings. So definitely double check with your local guidelines and state guidelines as well. So local culture councils will send denial letters first, wait 15 days for the reconsideration period, and once that period passes, then send the approval letters. In January, Mass Cultural Council will transfer the funds to local cultural councils and municipalities once the annual report is completed. We always get a lot of questions about that, so definitely keep that in mind. Local cultural councils will then send approved notifications and publicize grant awards once the annual report is completed. And then local cultural councils will begin processing reimbursement requests or grants. So council membership. Councils have between 5 and 22 members. 22 members is the maximum. So how do council members get appointed? They're appointed by the top appointing official, and the chief appointing authority and members of the local appropriating authority cannot serve as council members. So if you have any questions about that, definitely drop it in the Q&A box and we can definitely answer that. So most terms are 3 years, and members can be appointed for any length of time if they don't exceed 6 consecutive years. So each council must annually elect a chair, secretary, and treasurer. Local cultural councils may also elect to designate former officers or members as non-voting ex officio council members. Since they do not vote, they do not count toward the quorum or a minimum of 5 members. So definitely we get a lot of questions. Once you're off, you can definitely still be involved just by being an ex officio member. So the safe harbor rule, a member with an expired term shall continue to serve until the qualification of such member's successor, if needed for the council to reach quorum. This is something that is definitely not to be abused, but it is definitely there to really help the operations of an LCC. So management of local cultural council funds. So each LCC must keep all funds, state funds, mass cultural, interest earned, and locally raised funds in the LCC's municipal account. It must be a revolving account, separate from other monies. Councils are entitled to interest. If you have filled out the annual report, you would kind of know there's a section there that says stuff about interest. But locally raised funds can be spent outside of Mass Cultural Council guidelines for cultural purposes, and funds are distributed by the town accountant or equivalent. So what's the difference between Mass Cultural Council funds and local funds? So with our funds that we allocate to cities and towns and to LCCs, they must be spent in the upcoming grant cycle, and they must follow all state guidelines and reporting. So for local funds, there's no deadline for spending. You don't have to follow state guidelines, but it must support an arts and cultural purpose, and funds and financial activity must be reported as well. So for fundraising, we do allow fundraising, we do encourage it, and definitely check in with the specifics of our guidelines and your town or city before going about this. But fundraising includes private contributions, local government allocations, program revenues, and it does accrue interest from the LCC's municipal account. And donations are treated as locally raised funds and are tax deductible. Next slide. Great, thank you. So administrative funds. So LCCs may spend up to 5% of their state allocation each funding cycle for administrative expenses. This includes paid staff, postage, stationery, and publicity. So note, locally raised funds can also be used for the same purposes. Refreshments, this is a specific reason, but can be covered at public events like grant receptions and may not be covered at voting meetings. So if at any point you do have questions about what you can and can't spend your administrative funds on, definitely just reach out to your program officer and we can help talk that through. But right now I'm going to hand it over to my fellow teammate, Mina Kim, and she's going to be speaking a little bit about community engagement and council priorities.
So all local cultural councils have to conduct community input every year. And something that we've been working with local cultural councils is around organizing and thinking about community engagement. And so seeing engagement as something more than just information gathering and really using engagement with community members to create multiple channels of access that help support local programming and decision making. So at minimum, LCC should gather community input each year in order to get feedback from their communities and inform their council priorities. And as Timothea mentioned briefly, community engagement can be conducted in many different ways. And so it doesn't always have to be, solely a survey, but it could be a combination of a survey with a public meeting, or really any sort of conversation with the public. I know some LCCs have, pre-pandemic, have hosted information center sessions at local community venues, such as the Council on Aging or at a local coffee shop. So try to think about it in a broad sense. Next slide, please. And then council priorities. So right now, if you haven't already, councils should be thinking about which priorities they want to include in their council profile. And so these have to be updated by the end of day, August 31st. And this is because the application opens on September 1st. So we want to make sure that any prospective applicants are able to see the priorities to see if their project idea aligns with that particular LCC. Also, councils are strongly encouraged to develop funding priorities that reflect input from community engagement and are within the parameters of the guidelines established by the state agency. Next slide. In terms of the council programs, we changed it this year so that rather than 15% of the state allocation, an LCC may spend up to 20% of this year's fiscal year allocation. And this is to support the council program, which is a way to respond to cultural needs that are not otherwise being addressed by the applications that come through. Again, we encourage you to use your community engagement process to ask for specific suggestions or to elicit feedback and to inform your council programs. A final report is due on January 18th, which you just email to your respective program staff contacts. And this is due on January 18th of the following grant year. And I don't know how many councils are familiar with this, but council program funds can be used for paid staff who might be hired to help with the administration of a council program. So for instance, if you wanted to get someone to help with the social media for your particular council program, you could dedicate a certain percentage of the council program monies towards that staff person. In terms of the restrictions, so council program funds are separate from the administrative funds that councils are eligible to reserve. So councils are able to take up to 5% of the fiscal year allocation. And so that's considered to be solely dedicated to general administrative expenses that may come up. So the copying of the panel books, for instance, if you're using hard copies, postage and flyers, just generally promoting the council. So for those types of expenses, you would use your administrative funds, whereas the council program funds are specifically for your council program. In terms of the funds raised locally from local council programs, so those must be all kept in the LCC's municipal account. So if you do any fundraising or if you charge for something for your council program, all those funds go back into your LCC municipal account. And then when you're thinking about council program ideas, just make sure to follow the conflict of interest procedures so that there's transparency in the selection and development process of your particular council program idea. I believe Ricky Guillaume is taking over now. Oh, sorry, Veronica Ramirez-Martel will be going over the annual report.
Thank you, Mina. Hi, everyone. I'll be talking about the annual report. So there's a bunch of changes happening to what it looks like, but really the content is very similar. So as usual, very soon, either the chair, treasurer, or a member of the council should be scheduling a meeting with your municipal officer. The municipal officer will be receiving an account form from us that they will have filled out and bring to this meeting. On your side, you can use your municipal meeting prep sheet so that you can have your own sense of accounts. And during that meeting, you compare both your accountings to see if there's any discrepancies. If not, that's great. And you can sign it, you keep records, they keep records. And this is the information that you will use to fill out the financial section of the annual report. Right now, as you know, we're in the first part, which is just the public page. Once September 1 rolls out, we will be opening the financial reporting, and that is due October 15th. Next slide, please. So the annual report and what we were talking about right now is basically consisting of these few sections. So as usual, there will be an account of what happened in the past fiscal year. So what money came out, what came in, and what you have at the moment. To decide what's available for now, you'll do a year to this date reporting of the finances as well. And that, along with the allocation, will give you the amount available for granting. Once that is determined, applications have come in, you can have your voting meetings, review applications, decide. I'm excited to show you what that looks like in the new grant management system. It's a little bit of a change. And from there, you're going to be entering the granting decisions directly into the grant management system where you've been doing everything else along with the amounts. And this is the entirety of the annual report, and it'll be due by January 18th of 2022. And I think now it's Ricky's turn.
Yes, it is. Thank you, V. All right, funding criteria. So every local cultural council should evaluate projects on specific criteria made by the agency on whether the project fits into arts, humanities, and sciences, whether it serves a good enough public benefit, and whether it's accessible and equitable to all. In addition, every LCC can also establish local criteria where they have the option of reviewing how projects work with the community in terms of the dynamics of each town. And these priorities also must be listed in the council's webpage and new system before the application opens on September 1st. All LCC funds must be used to support activities that contribute to cultural vitality of the community. And there's some things to consider when you think about what a public benefit means in terms of large or small projects. It's not always the case that a large crowd means that the project serves a public benefit, or a small project doesn't serve enough in the community. Small projects with smaller audiences can do a lot as well. And we also definitely prohibit technical disapprovals in terms of applications with missing information or spelling or grammatical errors. We always encourage LCCs to reach out, let applicants know that certain documents are missing, or that you have questions on things, to work with them to make the applications more complete instead of just rejecting applicants based on missing information. Okay. So local criteria, as you all know, because COVID-19 had a huge impact on FY20 grantees and continues to have the impacts on the arts and cultural sector going forward, we definitely encourage LCCs to look at their criteria with the pandemic in mind. That includes shifting from project-based support to operational support, not only looking at projects in person or virtual, but allowing applicants to apply for renting supplies or buying supplies or renting studio time. We also encourage loosening local requirements for dates and venues with CDC guidelines, state guidelines, local municipal guidelines. It can be really hard to get a venue or a date set in stone in advance. So take that in consideration if your priorities, kind of mandate that a venue is set in stone. We also encourage applicants to apply for costs associated with moving to virtual programming, whether it be signing up for a Zoom account or a YouTube account with all the features. We encourage LCCs to promote virtual programming. And we also encourage LCCs to prioritize communities that were deeply impacted by a pandemic, which include artists of color, individuals with disabilities, individuals who come from low-income communities, and also individual artists without support of nonprofit groups. And we also allow LCCs to develop their own individual process for relief grants. When it comes to public benefit, We also want to remind LCCs, public benefit doesn't always mean in person, especially in these days and times. Virtual and remote programming offer great benefits as well. And it's definitely a good thing to support applicants whose projects take place over Zoom or YouTube, or maybe on the radio or in other virtual formats. When it comes to non-discrimination, all projects and events funded by the agency must meet ADA requirements. We definitely want everything to be accessible and equitable to all. So we encourage LCCs to look at applications where applicants make it strict information about the venues and any type of barriers, whether it's physical or in the virtual format when it comes to closed captioning or any other types of communication issues. And we also want, LCCs to work with applicants to kind of get to that point. So if they're struggling to find venues that are accessible with ramps or things like that, LCCs can grant conditional approvals that say, we want to grant you, but you need to make sure that your project is accessible by this date, or get a venue that's accessible by this time in order to fully accept the award. Again, when it comes to eligibility, applicants may apply for grants or programs that take place during the 18-month window between the eligibility from July. Applicants can also apply for projects that have already happened, knowing full well that funding isn't guaranteed. And LCCs are also authorized to establish a small window of eligibility, but if they do so, they must publish that window on their priorities by November 13th. All applicants must reside in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. LCCs can also accept applications from anyone who are individual artists, incorporated, private, or nonprofit organizations, 501c3s. Unincorporated associations can also apply if they can establish a nonprofit objective. Public schools, libraries, municipal agencies, and other local cultural councils are also eligible to apply, as well as religious organizations. There are some restrictions when it comes to grant funding. Funds received from the agency to LCCs should not be used to purchase food or beverages. The only exception is really when it comes to hosting a grant reception. Then in that case, non-alcoholic beverages, light snacks can be purchased. I believe 20% of the state allocation can be used towards that. And also individual students are not eligible to apply for scholarships, and an organization may apply to an LCC to sponsor a scholarship, provided that the council feels the scholarship program provides sufficient public benefit. And when it comes to reimbursement granting, many LCCs use the reimbursement model where an applicant will apply for a project. They will pay for the project out of their own funds, complete it, and then after the fact, they will submit the proper paperwork to the LCC for reimbursement, where the LCC will work with their municipality to reimburse the grantee. Grantees have 1 year from the date of their acceptance letter to accept reimbursement, and the grantee can submit an extension request for approval if more time is needed. And now I will pass it to our program manager, Lisa Simmons, to talk about direct granting and more.
Thanks, Ricky. Hi, everyone. So direct granting is something that we brought on a couple of years ago, and really it is it's a way for LCCs to actually feel like giving people the opportunity that it makes it more accessible to get money. One of the things that we really wanted to do was to make sure that everyone had the opportunity and didn't necessarily have to come out of pocket, but actually get their funds before they started their program. So as it says here, the intent is twofold: to enhance LCC programming and opportunities by imposing less financial hardship, and to simplify the payment process. We found that grantees were oftentimes submitting reimbursements a few times during the process of doing their programming, and this way it's one lump sum payment that actually gets granted out. Most of our grantees at Mass Cultural Council are direct grant. So we have 2 new documents that you can find here, and you will actually be getting this PowerPoint, so you can be clicking on these to see not only the direct grant guidelines, but also instructions for using the direct grant program. If you want to become a direct grant counsel, you must update your priorities by August 31st. And you can contact your program officer to find out more information. And the reason why this is because applicants will come onto your site to see whether or not you are reimbursement-based or direct granting, and that's going to make a difference for them as they're applying. Next. So here's a more in-depth look at direct granting. It is really a lot like reimbursement. One of the things that, you're going to go through the same process you would go through around accepting or denying applications. The difference is when you do the approval letter. So for this, you're doing an approval letter, a grant agreement form, a W-9, and a final report. And all of this is in the guidelines and sort of the how-to PowerPoint that goes with direct granting. Basically, you're going to send the grant agreement to them. They're going to send it back signed with a W-9 that's going to come to you. And then you are going to forward that to your municipality. You are not going to keep the W-9 form because that's personal information. So you are going to forward that, but keep a copy of your grant agreement. Municipalities will then process that paperwork and send direct payments right to the grantee through their local vendor warrant process. Once the grantee finishes the project, there's a final report that they need to send in to you. And so the last day to receive it is a year from that approval letter that you give them. You should review the grant agreements. They're going to come in. The municipal officer might have some questions about it. You may need to, if you are already a direct grant counsel, you know this, having conversations with your municipal officer. If you want to become a direct grant counsel, it's always a good idea to talk to your municipality to make sure that they understand that direct granting is okay with MCC money or Mass Cultural Council money. We have a whole, in the PowerPoint, which you will get, we have a PowerPoint that will give you the IRS code that makes it okay for the state money to be granted out directly. If you are when you're doing a council program and you're using those funds, you as a council will need to do reimbursement-based. You will not be able to do direct grant just based on what the municipality requires of its municipal employees. So again, direct granting is a wonderful way to support applicants to get that money out the door quickly, to not have people have to pay out of their pocket in order to do their program. And it really offers a sense of accessibility and equitability that sometimes reimbursement doesn't do. So if you are interested in doing direct granting, you still have that opportunity to do that. And you should then talk to your LCC members. I'll talk to your LCC program officers to help you with that. Next slide. So as you know, as you're going through the grant process and as you're doing approvals or disapprovals, one of the things that grantees or applicants do have the option of doing is doing a request for reconsideration if you are doing a denial. So we just wanted to go over this again and make sure that when you do your denial letters, applicants have the opportunity to submit their reconsideration to the local cultural council. That comes into us, to the communities team, to the LCC program officers, which we review, and we try to do it very quickly so we can turn it around. The applicant does have 15 days. So one of the things that people sometimes have a question about is whether they can start to do their approval letters once they make their decisions, and you cannot do that. You need to wait that 15 days to make sure that there are no reconsideration requests. And actually your approval letter should really not go out until you have completed your annual report. So just make sure that you're doing that you're following that timeline, because we don't want people to get into the situation where you've sent out your approval letters and you don't have enough funding in your account to cover that. Next slide. One of the other things too that has changed during COVID was the open meeting law. And when you get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on Governor Baker's temporary changed open meeting law. And that is that he has allowed it to continue that you can meet via Zoom. You still need to connect with your municipality to determine this process. All municipalities are different and they have different rules and regulations for their boards and commissions. So you should definitely just check in with them. But for us, it is okay for you to meet over a streaming platform to hold your meetings. You know they must be open to the public, which means you must post them, at least 2 business days before you have your meeting, just so people, if anyone wants to come outside of the LCC council members, they're given enough notice to do that. And you must have a quorum that's more than half of appointed LCC members in order to vote. Next slide. So public records law, just to go over this again, and then we'll talk a little bit about conflict of interest, but everything that you do is public record. You are a state and municipal employee. So that means that you should be taking minutes at every meeting, and you have to respond to requests if somebody asks you to view those minutes. So we have provided templates and meeting agendas and minutes, which are in the LCC toolkit, which is at massculturalcouncil.org. You'll find that it's helpful for you to just sort of like follow that agenda and make sure that you're taking the notes that you need to take, so you don't run into any issues of any conflicts of anyone feeling that that whatever they were talking about wasn't captured in the minutes. So all of your records that you take notes on and what you're doing on a monthly basis they must be stored for up to 6 years, and they have to be in a place where anyone can have access to them. So it's a really good opportunity for you to talk to your municipality to see where they keep their records, to see if you can keep those records there as well. Next slide. So conflict of interest, one of the biggest things is a lot of times LCC members will be also applicants to their own LCC or to other LCCs. So in the LCC guidelines, which you have access to through this PowerPoint by clicking on that link, there's a very extensive information on how to handle conflicts of interest within your LCC or as an applicant and an LCC member. So you should definitely read those over. It's really important that you do that before any kind of voting meeting, before you're applying, just so that you can be sure that you're filing the correct forms that you might do with your municipality. And one of the best things, we use it as well, is the Attorney of the Day program at the state, which really offers, and they're really quick turnaround. If you ever have any question, if you're reading those conflict of interest laws and you're not quite sure if it fits you or your problem, always call the Attorney of the Day. They actually like to answer questions before anything happens. So be sure you do that. Next slide. So lastly is the credit and publicity. Oftentimes, LCCs will ask that question of whether or not, you have to have the Mass Cultural Council logo or their logo. We do require that grant recipients acknowledge the support of the LCC and the Mass Cultural Council. That could be the Mass Cultural Council logo and the local cultural council logo. It could be the local cultural council logo. Oftentimes the question comes up if we're granting on an 18-month basis, which means you may be providing a grant to somebody who did a program in September and you didn't make your decisions until January. How is that applicant or how is that grantee going to acknowledge? And so some of the great ways to do that is for them to post it on their Facebook or their social media sites, to do that on their website to say that they did get support from the local cultural council or the Mass Cultural Council. So there are ways that if you are reimbursing a program that has already happened, there are ways for them to be able to use and do the credit and publicity. So if you have any questions of that, again, we are always here. Your program officers are always here to answer any questions that you might have. So I think we've answered a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A, but feel free to ask us any questions now. One of the things I did want to bring up is that just to acknowledge that by September 1st, all of your priorities, whether or not you want to be a direct grant council, must be updated. So that means when this program opens for applicants on September 1st, you will have already completed all of that. And it's just important that you go onto your onto Smart Simple, our new grant system, which some of you have already been on, which is wonderful, and update those priorities for what you actually want and what your community wants to see in your community in terms of arts and culture for FY22. So are there any questions that we need to answer?
Lisa, so there was a question in the Q&A box, but if my municipality has a guideline against prepaying for items, isn't this in conflict? What has precedence? My municipality payment guidelines or Mass Cultural Council?
The municipality will have. So for municipalities, as I said before, if we're doing direct granting, or they might not allow a municipal employee. They can't allow a municipal employee to get direct granting. But if the municipality does not want to do direct granting for all sorts of other reasons, as far as for applicants, we request that you have that conversation with us so that we can have that conversation with the municipality, because it is okay to do that. But oftentimes, in other situations, we defer to the municipality.
And there have been some questions about whether or not the yearly passwords are coming out again. And so because we're shifting from Mass-Culture to Smart Simple, we are no longer sending out the same password to each cultural council. And so recently, I think yesterday, right, Lisa, we sent out messaging about how to register on Smart Simple. And so each LCC member will need to register with their own email to access the annual report and other information that's relevant to the grant cycle.
And somebody asked a question about what percentage of councils are direct grant councils, and it's about 19%. We'd love to get that to 50. So if anyone wants to become a direct grant council, please let us know.
One quick question. So if an LCC has no denials, will the system allow them to submit their annual report before 15 days have passed?
That's a good question, because we ran into that situation certainly with FY21 funding, where a lot of councils were not giving any denials. So it's something that, Veronica, I don't know if we know that in the system yet, or it's a good question that we should certainly bring to the table.
Lisa, there's also a question from Audrey about relief grants. I know we allow LCCs to establish their own criteria, but it's something they need to work with municipalities, right?
Right. And you also need to put that in your priorities. So if you did want to do some sort of relief grant for artists or whomever, that one, you should definitely be talking to your municipality about how that distribution is going to happen. And you should also have it in your priorities that you are running a relief fund, so that applicants will know that. But we also have guidance documents on massculturalcouncil.org for you to take a look at, and some best practices. So we can also, Audrey, let you know of some councils that did do that you could take a look at.
Can you speak a bit, Lisa, to what happens if an LCC participates in the direct grant program and the grantee never completes the program?
So there are a couple of options, and it will say this in the direct grant PowerPoint as well as the guidelines. We don't want you to be chasing down people who received a direct grant but didn't do their program. So you have in your grant agreement, you can put in that grant agreement. The one that you're going to see when you go into the PowerPoint is boilerplate, but you can add to that anything you'd like. Like if you do not if you don't do your program, you need to return the funds. If you don't return the funds, then you're not eligible for a next year's worth of funding. So there are things that there are fail stops that you can put in your grant agreement. But if they don't, if they don't return those funds, then it's not up to you to have to go chase after them. We could also go in and try to get in touch with that grantee, but it shouldn't preclude you from doing the direct grant. We feel like that has been such a small percentage of people that are doing direct grant. The direct grant itself outweighs the benefits. So I mean, it's a great program, and we have found that there have been more programs that are happening in communities because of direct grant.
There was just a question in the Q&A about capital expenditures. So capital expenditures are allowable within the local cultural council program, and also operating expenses are also allowable. So we cover most everything aside from the two restrictions that we noted. So no individual scholarships, and applicants can't request funding for beverages and food.
Right, and then there's also a question here, does one have to file a conflict of interest form each year? No, but what you do need to do is you need to do your ethics training as a municipal employee. So when you become a member of an LCC, the municipality should be sending you a link to take the ethics training, and that you do have to do every year.
How about this question? If we have a paid employee, are they an employee of our town or city, or a freelancer subcontractor?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think we can get back to you on that tomorrow, but mostly the funds are being paid by the Mass Cultural Council. They could be an employee of your city or town. And mostly they are someone who's working within that city or town, but I think that they could also be a contractor who's coming in.
I would say that I think that the biggest factor might also be the time. And if they're on a very part-time basis, I think that the freelance would be what would make the most sense.
Mm-hmm. Veronica, someone's saying the website has a template that sends the denial letters and grant award letters rather than personal email or LCC account.
So there is currently a template in place for when, so we will talk about what happens when certain things happen, because it is not that whenever you say deny us a status, but there are some templates that we've created to go out. And for example, when you submit your annual report, one of the templates is just a generic, the council has decided to fund your grant. You will be receiving information from your local cultural council soon. And that's the only information it says, just to, give them a sense of like things are happening and you will get information soon. But we're leaving it up to you to send your approval letter with the content that you would like. If you like to do it by mail or via email, that is up to you.
Thank you, V. Lisa, there's also a good question about school programs from Meta. Hi, Meta. How about school programs? We normally have restrictions on other state funding, and also can we pay teachers' salary or transport? I know school programs are eligible, but with regards to teachers and salaries or school programs, we can't, replace curriculum, correct?
Right. So Timothy, were you answering this question?
Oh, no, sorry. That was my mistake.
So, we took out the rule of no substitution, which basically was that you couldn't pay for a teacher who's doing in-school programming. As long as the program isn't a program that's already being funded by the school or the teacher. So that's okay. You know, I mean, one of the things that says transportation, you can fund school trips, you can fund field trips. There used to be way back when a different field trip application that's now all part of an application, so it's not separate. So you can use your money to fund that.
And then I know that we're planning to send out, we have messaging for former applicants to the LCC program. Do we have an update on that schedule, Lisa?
So on the 12th, we are planning to send to applicants an email saying that the grant cycle will open and the public pages will open on September 1st. They will not open before that. So on September 1st, they will be able to go in and start applying to the LCC grant cycle. They will also get an email that is saying that by August 31st, they will need to, if they have not already, go into the Smart Simple program and pull off their applications from prior years. Those will not be available to them during the FY22 grant cycle because we're moving again to a new system. So those things in the old system, like your panel books, are no longer available. That we asked you to go in and take those down, within a certain time period. So because we're moving to this new system, applicants won't have access to that. So we want to make sure that they do. We give them enough time to do that. Any other questions, comments? So we are here again, as always, to support you in this new grant cycle. Veronica will be holding a webinar on Thursday to lead you through the annual report in a more in-depth basis. And she's also going to be recording and talking about, especially the financial reporting that will be a little bit different for you. It's the same things that we've asked for in the past for your financial reporting, but it's just it looks a bit different. So we want to make sure that you're comfortable going in there and updating your financial information and getting your financial information. And then also because the annual report is going to look different than it did in Mass Dash Culture, we also want to make sure that you're comfortable with going in there and completing your annual report. So that will be on Thursday, the 12th at 6 p.m.
It looks like someone is raising their hand. Oh, Sandra Noonan. Would you like to ask a question, Sandra? I just unmute you if you would like to ask a question.
So I posted a question. Do we have to file a conflict of interest form each year?
No, so you don't have to unless you're, every year. What you have to do is the ethics training that you will get the link to from your municipality. If there's just a municipal conflict of interest training that you need to go through to be an LCC member. And the only reason you need to be filing the conflict of interest forms is as it's stated in our guidelines, and it usually comes up when you're reviewing grants. If you know an applicant, if you're an applicant yourself, there are certain procedures that you need to follow. And if those things do come up while you're having your meeting, just make sure that it's also reflected in the minutes. It's really important that if there is something like that, if there's a conflict of interest, if there's any, as this is happening, to make sure that you're documenting that in the minutes. But that's really what you're using your conflict of interest forms for.
Thank you.
And then there's one more question. So anyone vaguely associated with our town or city cannot be on our council? So I believe it's elected officials, correct? So it's only elected officials who are restricted from participating on the council. And then Bob Katis has a question. If I get questions, I'd like to know what was sent. Thank you. Yes, so Bob, I saw your questions before and I'm not sure what happened, but they sort of disappeared. But Bob was asking if we could send the LCC members what's being sent to the previous applicants so that he can know what sort of questions might come forward.
Sure.
And
So
then
city-
how about,
Yes, right. So Mina,
only answer that?
yeah, that's about city employees can join us, yes, as long as they're not elected. Any other questions? Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We're really excited about this new grant year and our new grant management system. I think that you'll find it easier to navigate. We're really excited to be able to also get a lot of data from that. Vi can talk a little. She's been very much involved in helping to create the system for us. So I think that we're really excited for this year's grant cycle. So thanks for joining. We will see you hopefully on Thursday if you want to join us on the annual report. And as always, as I've said before, all of us are here for you to help support you through this grant cycle. And any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. So thanks so much.